Enzo Fernandez may be about to discover that losing the World Cup final was not the biggest disappointment waiting for him. The real shock could come when he walks back into Chelsea and realizes that the contract battle he thought would give him leverage may have completely turned against him. Because while Enzo was fighting for Argentina on football's biggest stage, Chelsea were watching something very different happen behind the scenes. The improved contract he wanted still hasn't arrived. The future he was reportedly considering at Real Madrid suddenly looks far less realistic. And Chelsea still have one enormous advantage that Enzo cannot simply ignore. His contract runs until 2032. That means Chelsea do not have to panic. They do not have to sell. They do not have to increase his salary. And they certainly do not have to help him find an escape route. In fact, Chelsea could do something much simpler and potentially much more frustrating. They could welcome Enzo back, put him straight into training, continue using him as one of their important midfielders, and then simply tell him that the contract he already signed remains exactly the same. No dramatic punishment, no public confrontation, no transfer request from Chelsea, just business. And that could be the biggest problem Enzo now faces. For months, the situation appeared to give Enzo's representatives some leverage. Talks over improved terms had reportedly taken place, with his camp wanting Chelsea to recognize his growing importance and status. The idea was understandable. Enzo had become one of the club's most important midfielders, and his performances had continued to attract attention across Europe. If Chelsea were not willing to give him the deal he wanted, there was always the possibility that another major European club could step in. And for a while, Real Madrid looked like the obvious name. Madrid represented almost everything a player like Enzo could want. Madrid represented almost everything a player like Enzo could want. Champions League football, enormous global prestige, a new challenge, and the possibility of leaving Chelsea without having to wait until the end of a 6-year contract. That possibility alone could have made Chelsea think carefully. But then Real Madrid changed the entire situation. On July 3rd, Madrid publicly stated that they had made no direct or indirect attempt to sign Enzo Fernandez and had no intention of pursuing the midfielder. That was a major development because this was not simply another transfer rumor being denied by an unnamed source. The club itself was distancing its name from the story. Suddenly, the escape route that looked so powerful became much weaker. And that gives Chelsea an enormous advantage. Think about the situation from the club's perspective. Chelsea have already secured Enzo on a long-term deal. They reportedly value the midfielder at around £120 million. They know he remains a highly talented player. They know he can contribute goals and assists. They know he can operate alongside Moises Caicedo. And they know their new manager wants him involved in the project. So why would Chelsea suddenly feel pressured to give Enzo everything he wants? They don't have to. That is the uncomfortable part. Chelsea can simply wait. And waiting may actually be their strongest weapon. Imagine Enzo returning to Cobham after the World Cup. He has just played in another World Cup final with Argentina. He has scored twice during the tournament. His international reputation has grown. He probably believes his performances have strengthened his argument for improved terms. He walks back into Chelsea expecting a conversation about his future. But instead, the message could be incredibly simple. You still have a contract. You signed it. You have years remaining. Nothing has changed. For Enzo, that could be extremely frustrating. Because a player can only force a club into a new contract if the club believes it has a reason to act. Chelsea may not believe that reason exists. They already have him. They already know what they are paying him. And they already control his future for several more years. This does not mean Chelsea want to get rid of Enzo. In fact, the opposite may be true. That is what makes the story so interesting. Chelsea could genuinely want Enzo to stay while still refusing to give him the improved contract he wants. Those two things can exist at the same time. Chelsea can believe Enzo is an important player and still believe his existing contract is sufficient. They can want his performances on the pitch without giving his representatives everything they are asking for away from it. And if Enzo becomes unhappy, the pressure slowly shifts. Instead of Chelsea asking themselves how they can keep Enzo, Enzo may eventually have to ask himself which club is actually prepared to pay Chelsea's price. That is a completely different negotiation. Before Madrid's public denial, Enzo's side could point toward another giant European club. Now that argument has lost much of its power. Madrid have said they are not pursuing him. Chelsea still have a long-term contract, and there is no immediate deadline forcing the club to make a decision. The clock is not necessarily working against Chelsea. Could be working against Enzo. That is especially important because Chelsea reportedly want a huge fee if the midfielder is to leave. A figure around £120 million has been discussed. That means even if Enzo decides he wants a transfer, there is no guarantee that another club will simply pay the amount Chelsea demand. A potential buyer would have to decide whether Enzo is worth that enormous investment. And that gives Chelsea another layer of protection. They can say they are not blocking Enzo. They can simply say that any club interested must meet their valuation. If nobody does, Enzo stays. And if Enzo stays, Chelsea continue benefiting from one of their most talented midfielders. His performances make that strategy even easier to understand. Last season, Enzo reportedly produced 15 goals and 7 assists for Chelsea. He also finished runner-up in the club's Player of the Season voting. Those are not the numbers of a player Chelsea need to throw away. At the World Cup, he also scored twice as Argentina reached the final. So this is not about Chelsea suddenly deciding that Enzo Fernandez has no value. Quite the opposite. Chelsea know his value very well. The question is whether they believe they need to pay more to keep him. And right now, they may believe they don't. There is also another major reason why Chelsea can feel comfortable. Moises Caicedo. The relationship between Enzo and Caicedo has become an important part of Chelsea's midfield structure. Caicedo can provide the defensive security while Enzo has the freedom to move forward and influence the game. That partnership gives Chelsea another reason to believe keeping Enzo makes sense. They do not need to break up a midfield combination that can still develop. And then there is Xabi Alonso. Chelsea's new manager has indicated that he wants Enzo to remain part of his plans. That matters because it destroys the simplest version of the transfer story. This is not necessarily a player Chelsea are desperate to sell. It may actually be a player Chelsea want to keep, but on Chelsea's terms. And that is where Enzo's situation becomes much more complicated. If Chelsea wanted him gone, Enzo would have leverage because both sides would want the same thing. Chelsea would want a transfer fee and Enzo would want a new club. But if Chelsea are happy to keep him, there is no reason for the club to rush into a new agreement. Enzo could complain. His representatives could negotiate. Other clubs could be mentioned. But Chelsea can still look at the contract and say, we are not forced to change it. That could create a very different kind of battle. Not a loud battle. Not a public war. A quiet one. A battle fought through patience. Chelsea can continue training Enzo. They can continue selecting him. They can continue building around him. And they can simply wait to see how long he is willing to remain unhappy. If frustration grows, eventually Enzo may decide that staying is no longer what he wants. And if that happens, Chelsea can still demand their price. That would completely reverse the pressure that existed months ago. The player who once appeared to have options could suddenly need those options more than the club does. There is also the complicated relationship between Enzo and English football. His time in England has not always been simple. Argentina's rivalry with England naturally creates additional emotion, especially after major tournament meetings. During the World Cup, Argentina defeated England in the semi-final, and Enzo played a decisive role in the comeback by scoring the equalizer. Chelsea themselves celebrated his performance. There is no evidence that Chelsea are planning to punish him because he represents Argentina, and it would be wrong to claim that they are. The contract issue is much more straightforward. Chelsea do not owe Enzo a new deal simply because Argentina reached another World Cup final. They do not have to increase his salary because his international profile has grown. And they do not have to make a transfer easier because another club might theoretically be interested. Their responsibility is to manage their squad and protect their investment. From that perspective, keeping Enzo under his current agreement could be completely logical. But for Enzo, the emotional side could be very different. Imagine reaching a World Cup final, believing your status has increased, returning to your club expecting recognition, and discovering that nothing has changed. No improved contract, no immediate transfer, no Madrid move, just the same agreement you signed before all of this happened. That could feel like a huge blow. And the most frustrating part is that Chelsea would not even have to say anything aggressive. They could simply point to the contract. They could tell Enzo that if another club wants him, that club is free to make an offer. But unless someone reaches Chelsea's valuation, there is no reason to change the situation. That is why the next few months could become extremely important. Enzo has to decide whether his priority is a better contract, a transfer, or simply continuing to play at Chelsea. Chelsea, meanwhile, can afford to wait. They have time, they have control, and they have a player who remains valuable to their plans. Real Madrid's public denial makes that power imbalance even stronger. If Madrid had been actively preparing an offer, Chelsea would have faced pressure. If several European giants were fighting for Enzo, Chelsea would have to think carefully about his future. But if the biggest rumored destination is publicly saying it does not intend to pursue him, the situation looks completely different. Chelsea can sit back and wait for the market to prove whether anyone is actually willing to pay their price. And that could be the real test for Enzo Fernandez. It is one thing to believe you deserve a bigger contract. It is another thing to find a club willing to pay more than £100 million to take you away. Those are two very different questions. And right now, Enzo may have an answer to the first one but not the second. That is why his return to Chelsea could be much more uncomfortable than people expect. He may return from the World Cup with a bigger reputation but less leverage. He may return with stronger personal expectations but fewer obvious alternatives. And he may discover that the club he wanted to pressure is actually comfortable waiting him out. There is no reason to believe Chelsea have secretly decided to humiliate Enzo. There is no confirmed plan to punish him. There is no evidence that the club wants to freeze him out. The potential strategy is much simpler. Keep him, play him, honor the existing contract. And if he wants something different, let the market decide whether another club is willing to pay the price. That is why the title of this story is not simply about Enzo returning to Chelsea. It is about what he returns to. He returns to a club that still controls his contract. He returns to a midfield where he remains important. He returns to a manager who wants him involved. And he returns without the Real Madrid escape route that once appeared to give his side leverage. The World Cup may have given Enzo more attention, more experience, and more global recognition. But it may not have given him the one thing he needed most in this contract battle. Control. Chelsea still have that. And until another club steps forward with a serious offer, they may have almost all of the cards. So when Enzo Fernandez walks back into Cobham, don't expect fireworks. The biggest moment may be completely silent. He could walk into training, put on the Chelsea shirt, step onto the pitch, and realize that the club has simply moved on without changing the deal. 6 years remain. The contract remains. Chelsea's valuation remains. And the question is no longer whether Chelsea will give Enzo what he wants. The question is whether someone else wants Enzo badly enough to take him away. Until that happens, Chelsea can wait. And for Enzo Fernandez, that may be the most painful part of all.